So my name is Tim Loudon. I'm the program manager of the Digital Analytics program. And thank you for joining us today. There's a whole bunch of you. We haven't done this course in a little while, but we did not expect to get the kind of response. I think we have over 200 people that registered. So that's great. I guess what that means is that there's a lot of folks who are interested in getting to know the basics and getting off the ground level with Google Analytics and the Digital Analytics program. So again, I mentioned my name's Tim. I'll be your co-captain today on this probably around 2.5 to probably 2.5, but up to 3-hour journey. It's a long course, and the reason it's long is because we try to pack in a whole bunch of information for you. And I'm joined today by my always right-hand man, Freddie Blicker, and also a special thank you before we get started to Alex, and Adrian, who are joining us from the DigitalGov University team, making sure that all this technology is working for us. I do want to also note, because I'm just going to throw this out there, that there's some construction going on outside my house. So apologies if you hear noise, but also my internet has died once or twice in the last 48 hours. So hopefully things are fine. But if not, if all of a sudden I disappear, Freddie is going to be at the ready to jump in and continue from where I left off. But hopefully that won't happen. As I mentioned, this is a longer training, and because of that, we have 2 sections where we're going to be taking breaks. So don't think that you're going to be sitting here for 2.5 hours straight. We do have 2 spots at which we break for 5 or so minutes. After the webinar is over, we will be sending out the customer satisfaction survey, and we very much appreciate if you can fill that out. Let us know what you thought about this, if it was crazy way too long, if you really enjoyed it. We read all that feedback, and we make decisions about how we should structure our training beyond that. Okay, with that, let's go ahead and get started with an introduction to the basics. So the one thing I wanted to note here before we get into any of the meat is that if you are attending this training right now and you are not a digital analytics program user, it is important to understand that this training is framed through the perspective of the unique implementation of the digital analytics program. So that doesn't mean that it won't be valuable to you, because we do cover a lot of general Google Analytics terminology and knowledge and information, but be aware that all the examples that you'll be seeing are going to be done in the DAP Google Analytics account, which makes things very different than if you are just what would be a more traditional implementation of Google Analytics. So we often sometimes have folks that are joining who are not digital analytics program users, and just be aware that it's going to look a little bit different than what you're used to seeing. Okay, so what is DAP? What is the Digital Analytics Program? It's a hosted shared service provided by TTS, which is within GSA. So we are all GSA employees or contractors on this call right now. And it's despite the fact that there are some agencies where folks may think that the agency is actually running the digital analytics program. It's a shared service offered out of GSA, but we offer it to all executive branch agencies. So what we offer is basically access to, in this case, an Analytics 360 account that is configured to collect data from all executive branch government websites. Currently, we're getting close to like 6,000-ish. It's hard to get an exact number, but we have about 6,000 federal government websites data all pouring into a single account. And you'll see when we get to some of the demos how that account is structured and how it'll be best for you to get your data out of it. The second pillar of what we offer is training, like you're in right now. So you can see when we send out this deck afterward, I'll be sending out the deck to the registrants. We've got some links here. We record all of our training and put them on our YouTube analytics channel, and you'll be able to go there and check out all the different things we've done before. We have about 40-some videos up there right now. We typically only do 1-hour sessions. This is an exception because it's the foundation class. We also offer implementation support. You can go to our GitHub repo and look at that. And of course, Freddie leads our help desk and one-on-one customer support. And you can reach us there at dap@support.digitalgov.gov. And we also run analytics.usa.gov, which is this site, which is powered off of the data that we have in the Google Analytics account. I'll be using analytics.usa.gov for some of our examples today, but if you've never seen this before, it's a site where we've got basically, it's a dashboard site where we've got information for all kinds of things: technology, location, top pages in real time, top sites over time, and so on and so on. And you can filter it by cabinet level agency. So sometimes we get people that are like, why isn't my agency in there? And like we had to make a cutoff somewhere. So basically it's cabinet level and postal service, but it is not some smaller independent agencies, and we apologize about that. That information is included in this main roll-up section, but they don't have individual pages for some of the smaller agencies. Okay, so how does the DAP Google Analytics account differ from a Google Analytics account that you may have that I typically call sort of agency-managed, independent, non-DAP Google Analytics accounts? So DAP is, I mentioned, provided by us. It uses Analytics 360, which is the paid version of Google Analytics. And that has some distinct advantages. The biggest one being you have the option of doing unsampled reporting, which is a big deal if your site gets quite a bit of traffic. Because if you use the free Google Analytics tool and your site gets a lot of traffic, you often will you'll hit what's called the hit cliff. And it's limited to, I think, 10 million hits per month. So if you get more than that, basically Google Analytics could turn off on you. And it's also a good thing for when you're looking for data over a longer period of time. So if you're looking for an annual report, for example, looking over the span of an entire year's worth of data, that is a lot of processing power. And the free Google Analytics will usually sample that data very hard and give you a report based on a tiny percentage of the data. Whereas with the paid version, you can request an unsampled report and get the unsampled numbers. So we use a common page tag code, a tag page code, sorry, which is basically, for implementation purposes, everybody uses the same script that we have developed, and it puts all the data into one account. So we arrange profiles at the agency level. So a long time ago, Google Analytics called them profiles. Now they call them views. They're all named based on legacy, so you'll hear us interchange the term profiles and views. But basically, if I were to go into my Google Analytics account right now, you can see over here, we've got all these different agency views: Department of Labor, Department of Interior, Department of Defense, and so on and so on. So every agency has its own view. And then we also have the roll-up view, which is sort of everything all piling into one space. So when you're doing your reporting for your specific agency, you'll always be wanting to do it in your departmental view or your agency view. And we'll talk more about that in a bit. One of the limitations is you can't link it with other tools like Search Console, or in this case, we don't link with any ad, like Google Ads or any other platforms like that. Search Console, we'll talk a little bit more about, but it's basically getting your search queries from Google, and you cannot link it with the way we're structured. So you'd have to have your own independently managed GA to do that. So the good news is it can be run concurrently with your own Google Analytics code or another analytics tool if you decide to use Adobe Analytics or something, Matomo, any of the competitors. This is not only something you can do, but something we recommend you do. And I think not enough people understand that. But in my opinion, the best bang for your buck is to have both DAP and another singular independently managed analytics tool running concurrently, because there are pros and cons to having both. And if you want to really get into a deep analysis, having both is going to give you your best source of data. And then also, if one of them for some reason things happen, somebody accidentally edited code or something and they stop recording, then you have backup as well. The DAP account is designed to roll up data for agencies and collect government-wide metrics. So the sort of impetus of the digital analytics program was the 2012 digital government strategy. And the reason why DAP was created was because we've got these agencies in government that are sprawling and have many subcomponents, and they each have many, many websites. And there was no way for people to get data about trends or technology of visitors that would be representative of, forget even a whole agency versus the entire government. So, I use HHS as an example here because they're a very complicated agency. Within HHS, you've got FDA, CDC, CMS, AHRQ, NIH, the various institutes. They all manage websites. And before the digital analytics program existed, if the chief technology officer of HHS wanted to know what the most visited content was, or let's say the Secretary of Health wanted to know what's the most visited content that we have across all of our websites at HHS. There was no way to know that because you'd be chasing down literally hundreds of points of contact to get them all to try to report with that data. Whereas now, with the DAP program, you can drill down to the level of a single click on a page, but you can scope it out from a page to a website, from a website to an agency or a sub-agency, and then from the agency level all the way up to the whole of government. Okay, if you have your own Google Analytics implementation, could be free or paid, depending on, there is a growing number of agencies that also pay for their own Google Analytics account or Adobe Analytics account right now. It used to be only a handful, but I'm seeing it continue to increase. Also, you might have a Google Analytics free account. That's fine too. You obviously control all of the aspects of an independent Google Analytics account. You control user management. You control the configuration of it. You control the customization of it. Those are all things that for the DAP account, we control. Also, some non-DAP compatible features are available. So if you're one of the few agencies that actually does advertising, you can link if you manage your own Google Analytics account, you can link it to Google Ads, or you can also link it to Search Console. And certainly Search Console is something that we feel is very valuable and worth having, even if you don't link it to a Google Analytics account. And this is probably the biggest difference, is that your Google Analytics implementation is often, an independent one, is often designed to measure only your site. So only USA.gov or only state.gov or whatever it may be. Whereas if you're in the DAP account, as we'll see when we're doing demonstration, you've got all of your agency sites in a single view, and that requires you to have to use segments or filters to be able to drill down to a single site. All right. So when we get started with Google Analytics, the first thing we need to do is understand the most basic terms and concepts, because it's not really worth going into the interface and showing you everything if you don't understand what you're looking at. So first, what is Google Analytics? Well, here's a Google screenshot from probably quite a while ago at this point. But it says here, it's a service offered by Google that generates detailed statistics about a website's traffic and traffic sources and measures conversions and sales. I think there is a misnomer that Google Analytics is strictly a tool for marketing or e-commerce. Obviously, in government, we don't do a whole lot of e-commerce. We're not usually selling widgets, although there are a few exceptions. And it certainly doesn't need to be used for that. In my opinion, Google Analytics is incredibly useful for user experience, for determining the success of your outreach, for content strategy, a whole bunch of different things that you can use this tool for and why it's valuable. And it works with JavaScript. So obviously, we're not going to get into a big discussion about what front-end web design or front-end web development looks like here. But if you think of three main components of the modern web as HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, HTML is like the information in its most bare form. It's like the words on the page or the photos on the page. CSS is the design aspect. So that's sort of how the words look, what color the buttons are, where things are placed. And JavaScript is like the action, like the verbs. When you submit an email address, JavaScript is the thing that takes it from the input and sends it somewhere to be recorded. When you see pop-ups come up, they are usually triggered by JavaScript. So in this case, Google Analytics is a JavaScript file that does a whole bunch of things in the background that users don't see. And it's basically the analogy I use is that if you are imagining, as you travel through the internet, if you were to imagine yourself, your physical human self, jumping from site to site, you have this backpack on. And in that backpack, it contains a bunch of information about how long you're sitting on the pages, what pages you're visiting, what kind of device you're on, your relative location, and so on and so on and so on. And when you land on a page, basically the JavaScript for Google Analytics rips open your backpack and it reads all that information. And it says, oh, this person is using Chrome on an iPhone, and they're somewhere in the region of Kansas City, and they're spending this much time on the site, and these are the pages they're visiting. That's kind of the analogy that I attempt to use. It probably is flawed. OK. The most basic foundational concepts to understand Google Analytics is to know the difference between dimensions and metrics. And so I've got the sort of the definitions here. But basically, the way that you can think about this is a dimension describes data. It is an attribute or characteristic of an object that can be given values, whereas a metric measures data. So we've got a descriptor versus a counter. Elements of a dimension that can be measured as a sum or ratio. To some extent, this doesn't hold true in every single case, but to some extent, metrics are numbers, they are countable things, and dimensions are descriptions of those things. And this will make more sense if it's new to you in just a moment. So here we've got this chart. And you see we've got dimension category. A dimension category is city, whereas a metric category would be area in square miles, or population, because those are things that are countable. When you put the two together, you create sort of a chart of data that gives you understanding as to not only what the metrics are, but also what's describing those metrics. So when you have a dimension for city, you could get a result like San Francisco is 231 square miles in area and has a population of 800,000, right? Without those things together, without a dimension to describe what you're looking at in the numbers, and the numbers to show you what kind of volume you're getting for that dimension, it doesn't really make any sense. If I just said population 800,000, you'd say, well, where are you talking about? If I just said San Francisco and you were interested in population, obviously that doesn't make any sense either. So all data in Google Analytics is broken down into basically these two giant funnels. It's either a dimension or it's a metric. OK, so usually everybody does not have the option to unmute themselves. We are asking you also, do not unmute yourself here. This is a rhetorical question. I want you to think about it. So here's an exercise, and I know that we haven't gone over all these terms yet. But if you were to guess in your head, say to yourself, which of these do you think is a metric? A, social source, B, landing page, C, pages per session, or D, month of the year? So if you said C, pages per session, you have a good grasp of what a metric is. And the reason for that is the answers for, or the sort of return results for a category of social source, in this case would be something like Twitter or Facebook. The data return for landing page would be a URL. And we'll talk more about what landing page is in just a bit. The return on the category of the dimension month of year would be January or February or March. Fun note, this is one of the cases in Google Analytics where a dimension can also be a number, because Google Analytics will associate January with 01, February with 02, March with 03, and so on. But don't be fooled, because if you're using a dimension month of the year and it says 4, it's not talking about the number 4. It's talking about April, right? Anyways, so pages per session. That would be the metric, because that's something we can count. How many pages does someone view in a visit to a website? It might be 2, it might be 27, but that is something that is countable, and therefore that is a metric. All right, let's talk about some common metrics and dimensions. So the most fundamental, and if you think about this, I always think about it in terms of like most broad into most granular. The most granular metric in this case, not the most in all of Google Analytics, because we can get even more granular than a page view. But in the scope of the 3 main ones, page view is the most granular, and it refers to any time a page loads. That includes hitting the back arrow. So page view, if you're someone new to Google Analytics, probably page views is the thing that people look to the most. I would not say that it is a determinant of success in itself, but a lot of people want to just know how many page views did we get. And so let's demonstrate what a page view looks like. I'm going to show you analytics.usa.gov later. So let's just go to USA.gov right now. So if I'm on USA.gov, which is run by some folks also here at TTS, it's a sister organization. Right now, USA.gov itself, that is a page load. That's a page view. So then if I go say, I'm going to learn about the federal response to COVID-19. Now I'm on USA.gov/coronavirus. That is a page view for this particular page. If I'm here and I say, oh, this isn't what I wanted to see, and I hit the back button, that is another page view for USA.gov, the homepage. I could refresh this page. That is yet another page view. And the reason for this is how it works technically is when you load a page, the browser reads all of the code behind it. And when I say all of the code behind it, I'm talking about this, the page source. So for those of you who are not familiar with it, if you right-click in some open space on a web page and you say View Page Source, you'll see this is all the code behind this page, right? So when I load it, the browser reads all this stuff, and it's got HTML that tells me what words to be on the page. It's got CSS, here you go, that tells me how to make the page look pretty. And it's got JavaScript, right? And every time this runs, the browser runs through all this code that we see here, and it sees the Google Analytics JavaScript code, and it executes it. And every time it executes it, it tells Google Analytics to record a page view. And that's why it doesn't matter if you hit the back button, if you hit the refresh button, whatever you want to do, every time a page is loaded, that counts as a page view for that page. And when I say page, I'm looking specifically at the URL here, a unique URL. Okay, that's a page view. Now, something that it is kind of confounding when the first time you hear it, or you know, what's funny is like, I feel like a while ago in the analytics community, people love to talk about this term of uniques. They just said uniques. How many uniques did we get? That doesn't really mean anything. But if you're talking about a unique page view, you're talking about the aggregated page views generated by the same user during a session. And what that means is there can only be one unique page view per page per session. So to demonstrate that, oh, somebody needs to mute. What we've got here is that what I just showed you, the USA.gov, when I went to various different pages and then went back. USA.gov, the homepage, this particular page, can only have one unique page view per session. So it means I could refresh it 10 times. But because I'm one session, I'm in the same session here, then it would only count as one unique page view. But also, I went to this COVID-19 page. This would get one unique page view in the session, even if I refresh it, even if I go back and forth between these pages. So what that's supposed to do is say, look, there might be someone who is in your site, and I know we haven't defined session yet, but that's coming. And in the span of their visit, they viewed this coronavirus page 10 times. But if you want to understand how many times it's being visited in a sense of how many times it's viewed per visit, It's always just, there's one in a unique page view. I know that's kind of strange. Okay, let's talk about session. So this was formerly called a visit. It is still often referred to colloquially as a visit. It is the entire time someone is on a site, and it may consist of many page views. So I was over here at USA.gov. Anytime, the entire time I am in this domain, and as in USA.gov, I can click on all the things I want, and as long as I am not going somewhere outside of USA.gov as a domain, this is all within one session. So right now I am, I'm just loading up tons of pages. I've probably just done 8 page views, but this is all a single session. So within the session, I had 8 page views. You can have many page views per session, but a session is basically a visit. Now, tricky thing. The default configuration for Google Analytics is that if I am to go to a subdomain, as in something.usa.gov, and if I click on Espanol, maybe, no, they just have a directory. But if I were to find a link somewhere here that would take me to something.usa.gov, then the session would be over. Because if I travel outside of this particular domain, then the session is over. So I think if I do a search, actually. Right, so now I went to search.usa.gov. And if I were to go back into it now that's starting a new session. So that's something to know. There's reasons why we do it that way. If you want to hear more about why we do it that way, you can email us and I can explain it further, but there's a big, long sort of explanation about why it happens. But just keep in mind that when we're talking about a session, we're talking specifically about a domain. And then obviously, if I went out to something like state.gov, then that ends the session for USA.gov, and it starts the session in state.gov. All right, let's go back here. Oh, before I get to user, let me go back here. The question that's always asked about session is, okay, what happens if I'm at USA.gov and I'm reading something and I click on something else and then I get distracted and I go to, FERC.gov. I'm hanging out on FERC.gov and I'm reading, and this thing just stays open. The question is always, how long does a session go? And the answer is, by default, there is a 30-minute session timeout. That means that if I am to leave this open and I don't click on anything, I don't load any new pages, I don't basically wake up the browser, after 30 minutes, it will automatically time out. So if I'm over here on FERC.gov for 30 minutes, or I go make a sandwich or do whatever I do, and I come back at 32 minutes, and then I click something, that will be a new session. So session timeout, 30 minutes. Okay, users. A lot of agencies try to use this metric. It is formerly called visitor. I do not recommend using this as your main metric for understanding metrics about your site. And I'll tell you why. And I'll also tell you, if you're going to use it, what you should understand about it and how you should use it. So theoretically, if page view is the most granular, we've got many page views in a single session, and then you could have many sessions attributed to a single user. In an ideal world, a user is a person, right? In an ideal world. It could be, Sally goes to visit USA.gov on Thursday, and then she comes back on Friday, and she comes back on Sunday. It is 3 sessions, but it is 1 user. Now, how does this get messed up? And I have my little, you see my little logo down there saying, watch out, dangerous. Users, the way that Google Analytics can tell who a user is by cookies. Cookies are unique to a browser and therefore unique to a device. So when I said Sally visits USA.gov on Thursday, Friday, and Sunday, and that would theoretically be 1 user, If on Thursday, Sally visits on her work computer, on Friday, she visits on her personal computer, and on Sunday, she visits on her phone, she's going to look like 3 users, not 1. So even though Sally is 1 human, if she uses different devices, she's looking like multiple users. So the cautionary tale here is don't look at the user metric as if it represents humans, because it doesn't. It's going to be inflated. The other aspect that is somewhat new into this is that browsers are starting to disable what we call persistent cookies. So, for example, Safari is run out of this software, this code called WebKit. And WebKit announced maybe a year ago now that basically they are going to have a cookie timeout of 7 days. So what that means is that if Sally, even if she visited on her same laptop, let's say her personal laptop, she visited USA.gov on a Wednesday. If she waited until the following Thursday to visit again, she would look like 2 visitors if she was using Safari. Whereas classically, the amount of time for someone to be considered a returning user or being tracked as the same user again and again, it was 24 months. So Google Analytics has a default user cookie timeout of 24 months, but certain browsers are now moving to drastically shorten that. And I have a feeling the other browsers are going to follow suit. Also, certainly if someone deletes their cookies, then they show up and they look like a new user and so on. So if you are going to have to use users, rather than look at it as a raw number, I would look at it as a percentage increase or decrease. Because at least in that sense, it's measuring the same, it's using the same criteria to measure, but saying you had 10,000 users in a month does not mean there were 10,000 humans. Alternatively, if you say there was a 20% increase in users in a month, you have a better chance of that being closer to 20% more humans, because you're going to get the visitors visiting on different devices every single month. So first recommendation, try not to use user. I think session is a much more solidly defined and technically capable metric. But if you're forced to use it because you've been using it for years and you can't convince your management to look at something different, then try to move from reporting it as raw numbers to reporting it as percent increase, decrease. Okay, a few more. Bear with me here. Bounce rate. So bounce rate is the percent of sessions where a user lands on a page and does not view another page. So in other words, a one-page session. So if I were to go to irs.gov, and I get here and I see this and I'm like, oh, nope, that's not what I wanted. I actually wanted to go to something different, USDA.gov. I don't know. I was only on irs.gov for one page. So that is what's called a bounce. And it doesn't matter, like right now, for the sake of ease, I'm going to home pages, but it doesn't matter where you go. I could do a Google search, for example, for Farmers Relief, USDA, probably get something here. There's USDA.gov. So I could land here, this press release page. If I read this and then I leave and say, oh, okay, I read this thing. Now I'm going to go back to Google. If I do that, that was also a bounce on that particular USDA.gov page. Okay, so we're going to talk more about bounce rate in a little bit. Whoever just joined, if you could mute, please. So we'll talk more about bounce rate when we get to events, but right now the thing to know is it's a one-page session. We have a slide on it later, but there's a famous Google Analytics blogger named Avinash Kaushik, and his description of bounce rate was, I came, I puked, I left. That doesn't necessarily hold true, but that's how you can remember it. All right, source and medium. These are dimensions. They are technically 2 different dimensions, but Google has done us a favor, and they smashed them together with a slash between them so that you can get the data together. And I'm not trying to be punny here, but a medium is a source of traffic type, and a source specifies it. That definition is probably horrible. It makes a lot more sense if you see what it looks like. And so examples are Google/organic, meaning the person came from organic traffic, which is search engines. So whether it be Google, Bing, Yahoo, Ask Jeeves is gone, DuckDuckGo, things like that. And then the source section specifies that medium. So the reason why we have both is because you might want to understand how much of your traffic comes from all organic search engines, and then obviously which ones are drive more. And more than likely, that's always going to be Google at this point. But you can see it'll be organic Bing or organic Google or whatever. Another example is social. So we've got social as a medium, and the source could be, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, who knows, TikTok. Maybe, I don't think you can do links from TikTok yet. I'm not sure. I'm not hip enough to know that. Maybe you can. But obviously it would be, you've got a broader bucket that is medium. So that would be, organic, social, email. We're going to talk later about direct traffic. And then you've got source, which specifies it a little more concisely. And finally, for the fundamental terms here, we're going to talk about referrals. A referral is a visit to your site based on a link from a third-party site. And what I mean by a third-party site is basically another website that is not an organic search engine and is not social media. So that could be the WashingtonPost.com. WashingtonPost.com does a story and they link to you. Or it could be a researcher, some sort of journal article or something that's online that points back to a specific page on your site. Those are referrals. Traffic coming from another third-party site that is not a search engine and is not a social media platform. All right, there are tons more terms. As you get more into Google Analytics, you'll learn a whole bunch more, and we can't spend the whole time going over them all right now. But I do include in the slides, which you'll get after this, a glossary. And this particular person updates this glossary every year, and it has a whole bunch of terms that you can look at the definitions for. All right, but now that we have sort of a basic understanding, let's do this exercise here to understand sessions, page views, and unique page views. So this blue arrow, for our purposes, is going to represent a session. It is you landing in a site, and everything in blue is within the same site. And when you land in that site, you view page 1, and then let's say you click on a link and you go to page 2, and then you say, that's not what I want, and you hit the back button and you go back to page 1. So in your head, I want you to think here, how many page views did page 1 have in this session? 2, because we've got 1 here and 1 here. How many page views did page 2 have? 1, because it was only ever seen once, so it could only have 1 page view. How many page views in the session? 3, because page 1 was viewed twice, page 2 was viewed once. Okay, 3 total page views per session in this particular session. Now, knowing what we know about unique page views, how many unique page views does page 1 have? 1, because you can only have 1 unique page view per page per session. How many unique page views does page 2 have? Also 1, because it was, even though it was only viewed once, that's okay, that's a page view and a unique page view. And so we had 2 unique page views in the entirety of the session. Now, we didn't talk about entrances, but entrances is a metric that corresponds with the dimension landing page. And what that means is it is when a page is the entrance point into a site. So basically, an entrance means a specific page was the first page seen in a session. So with that, page 1 has 1 entrance. Page 2, 0 entrances, because it was the second page viewed. So only this first page can have an entrance. And of course, over the course of the whole session, not applicable because you only ever have one. You have one entrance per session. So there's no sort of metric that's entrances per session. So now pages per session, 3. Because over the course of the session, we saw 3, right? So that's same thing as page views, pages per session, same thing. Okay. So when we're talking about page views, a lot of people, and unfortunately a whole lot of, folks that are in authority all over, in private sector and public sector, whatever, if they don't have enough time to really understand what you are trying to do with your website and with analytics, this is the common phrase. Tons of visits a month, done, got them, give me my bonus, right? The reality is that page views is not the be-all, end-all of determining success in your agency or your website. You might have a website that gets very, very few page views, but it may be wildly successful. I've been using the same example for years, so if you've heard this before, forgive me. But I thought of an example. This is not true. But if you were some sort of department within HHS that was offering a grant to neurosurgeons to research a new type of surgery for brain cancer, let's say, and you issued this, you have this site or this page that is designed to give information about that particular grant and accept applications for it. Your target audience is tiny because your target audience is neurosurgeons, and there aren't that many in the world as opposed to the general public. So you might have very, very few page views, but the goal of the site or the page is not to get tons of page views. The goal is to find the right candidate to give a grant. And then come 4, 5, 6 years from now, if that grant spurred an actual revolutionary surgery for neurosurgeons to operate on brain cancer, then heck, that was a wildly successful page or site that you put up, right? So what I'm trying to get at here is page views doesn't really tell you anything about whether or not your users are achieving what you want them to achieve. Now, page views can be beneficial if you know that your main goal is for people to read content. But in a lot of cases, your online objectives for your audience might be different. So it's very important to understand what your organization's mission is, understand the online objectives of your users. Why does this website exist? What are we trying to get people to do? And then use Google Analytics to track the success of people, downloading that form or completing an application or reading content or so on. So this is the #1 goal, obviously, for information sites, getting people the content at the right time. So how do you know if you're achieving that? Well, one of the things that I wanted to talk about was bounce rate with regard to content. So another thing is that some folks have automatic associations in their mind with metrics being positive or negative. And bounce rate is always seen as a negative thing. People are scared of bounce rate. So if your site has a bounce rate of 70%, people are like, oh no, that's not good. Everyone's landing here, but they're not reading all the stuff we want them to read. As I mentioned, Avinash Kaushik says, I came, I puked, I left. You've got this sort of like things going on you'll find online that says high bounce rate is generally 50% for non-blog sites. What I'm here to tell you is that, #1, bounce rate is not necessarily bad, and we'll talk about that. But the other thing is that bounce rate is not really a good measure, a good metric when you look at it site-wide rather than as a page-level metric. And here's the reason why. So if you've got a high bounce rate, what's the potential, what are the reasons that would be that it's a bad thing? Well, the users didn't find what they were looking for, or something was weird with SEO and somehow they put in a term in Google and they landed on your site and it's not what they were looking for and they go back to Google to find it. Or users didn't know the next action to take. Maybe your whatever page they landed on was confusing. They couldn't figure out the where to get more information and they left. Okay, that could be bad. But what is the good thing? Well, the users found what they needed on the first page, and then they left. And I think oftentimes especially when folks are first getting into analytics, they overlook the fact that sometimes it doesn't matter if people visit 10 pages on your website. Sometimes it could be that you just want them to get information that exists on one page. And that's counter to a lot of traditional sort of talk about Google Analytics. But here's some examples. So number one, if you have a blog site, you're probably using marketing or outreach to promote that specific blog, whether it be via social media or email or whatever. If people come and read that blog and then they leave, it's not necessarily a bad thing if that content is important. Another example that I use is like if the National Park Service knows that there is a man-eating bear that's roaming through Glacier National Park, and they send out a message to people who signed up for alerts that are visiting Glacier National Park that says, hey, you should know about this bear. Here's what you should do. Here are things that you need to take to avoid encountering the bear, and so on. The Park Service doesn't care if you went and said, oh, hey, after we read this information about the man-eating bear, let's plan our next trip to Yellowstone. That's not, I mean, that's just not realistic. What they wanted to do is get you information. And if you got that information and left, not necessarily a bad thing. So this is why bounce rate is better as a page level metric. Now, if someone comes to your homepage, and you obviously homepages are like specifically designed to take your users elsewhere and to get them information on a certain aspect of your site or agency, then if you have a high bounce rate there, okay, that probably signifies to you something's wrong. Because if people are somehow getting to your homepage, but then they're not clicking on anything through a menu or through a link or whatever to go to read something else, that's probably an issue. But if you've got blogs or, depending on what kind of content you have, it's very possible that you might have content that you say, you know what, a high bounce rate's okay here because we got that information out to the desired target audience, and that's what we were aiming to do. You can do this with almost any metric. There's not necessarily good or bad metrics. So another thing is pages per session. So if we have a really high pages per session, you could say, oh, that's great. Users are engaged and they're clicking on all sorts of pages. We've got 20 pages per session average. That means, everyone's reading all our stuff. But the bad could be, the users are coming, and I'm making this example up. I'm not trying to put anybody on the spot here. But let's say, oh, a bunch of users are coming because they're looking to renew their passport and they can't find out where to download the form. So then they're looking at 20 pages in a session, but not because they're happy and consuming all the content, because they're looking for something and they can't find it. So in both cases, the user is very engaged, but they're engaged for different reasons, right? So that's why, in some cases, people view bounce rate as bad and pages per session as good. Not always necessarily the case. Everything needs to be taken in context. And there's no golden metric. There's no single metric that you can spout and record only that metric and say, oh, this means we've done a good job or we haven't. You have to look at a multitude of things. And I know that that's not easy to hear. I can't tell you how many times we get emails from folks that are saying, give me like the top 3 things that I need to be able to, communicate to my management about whether or not we're doing a good job. And the reality is there aren't really 3 default metrics that will tell you that, but also it varies for every site. And it depends on what you want your users to do, what your conversions look like. It could be a million different things. Okay, do we have questions so far? We're already almost an hour in. I think I need to speed up a little bit. Freddie, are there questions that should be addressed right now on anything I've covered so far?
Great question. I'm checking the chat box right now. Yes, there is one question. Does a session remain the same if you click on a link that opens a new tab?
That's a great question. So Yes. So if you click on a link, and this is like a big debate in the online world, right? Is should links open in same tab or should they open in new tabs? I have my own personal opinion about that. I'm not gonna try to foist it upon you. But if a link is clicked and it opens in a new tab, and that tab that you were originally on stays open, the session will keep running because the page is still open. But one thing that I forgot to mention about sessions is if you can think about sessions as basically being defined by timestamps. Everything in Google Analytics is done with timestamps because the recording of data happens when the browser loads, right? It doesn't sit there with a timer on. So when I'm talking about metrics like time on page, for example, that's one of the metrics you can get in the system. If I go from page A to page B, the way that Google figures out how long I was on page A is it takes a timestamp when page A loads, and it takes a timestamp when page B loads, and it subtracts them. And it says, oh, okay, well, there were 3 minutes that passed between page A and page B. We know you were on page A for 3 minutes. When it's talking about a session, it takes the point at which page A loaded and the point at which your last page of a visit loaded. Now think about that. It's counterintuitive to what you would think. So when I'm talking about a session time, we're talking about not if you were on the last page of a session for 4 minutes, it's not going to count that in the session time because it doesn't know when you left. It only knows when you loaded the final page. So it's a concept that's important to understand, but it's tracked the same throughout everything because it can't tell you how long you were on the last page for anything. So when you see average session time, it's always indicative of not including that how long you were on the last page. That also means that if there is a bounce, when you only viewed one page, there is no time on page for a bounce because you load page A and then you leave the site, and Google Analytics has no way of knowing that you left. So there's no time on page for a bounce. You can only get time on page or average session time when a visitor visits more than one page. But yes, you're right. Theoretically, if a link opens in a new tab, that session stays open. And you could continue it by going back to that original tab and clicking something, and it would continue. Any other questions?
Yeah, 2 more questions. Is an entrance used with landing pages?
So okay, you would pair the metric entrance with the dimension page because like with page, you usually look at page views, you could look at bounce rate and so on. But you would pair entrance with that because then it would tell you, okay, a page might have been visited 100 times, but it had 20 entrances, meaning there were a total of 100 page views, but 20 of those times it was the first page somebody saw. Alternatively, there's a dimension that we're going to cover later called landing page, which already does that work for you. It says only show me, basically the metric you use with that is sessions, and it says how many sessions was this page the first page that someone saw. So they are correlated, but you wouldn't use them together really. You use entrances with the dimension page, and you use sessions with the dimension landing page. They are telling you similar information, but you would pair them differently. Hope that helps. I know it's confusing.
Great. And we have one other question. It's actually 2 more questions. How does a single page app design get counted where a click scrolls you down or up, not to another page? That's definitely more of a complicated question that may not be good for this forum in a DAP 101 series, but Tim, I'll just kick it over to you in case you want to
touch
just a bit.
So single page applications, I'll just talk about it real quick. They confound Google Analytics a lot because you don't have a new page load. You have data, you have information being dynamically loaded without a new browser load. There are ways to get around that. If that person wants to email us specifically, we can talk about what we call virtual page views, which is creating false page views, even though there's not an actual page load based on a dynamic load of content in a single page app. So email us, dap@support.digitalgov.gov, and we can review that question with the person more specifically.
And the last question here is, wouldn't the length of time someone is on a page before they bounce tell you whether the info you provided was useful or not, and whether the bounce rate is a good metric or a bad metric?
So you don't have the time on page before there was a bounce. You only have a single timestamp. So if I land on USA.gov and I'm here for 10 minutes, the only timestamp that Google Analytics sees is when I landed. So then if I leave and I go, I go to some GSA.gov, then it doesn't know how long I was on that page. So it can't tell me whether or not the bounce was good or bad. There are other things you can use to understand that. There are events that you can implement for example, page scroll, and you can know how far someone scrolled on a page. But in its own default, most distilled implementation, you can't tell how long someone was on a bounce. Okay. I think we should probably move on. Freddie, I think this is where you take over, or do I still go?
I take over from here. Thanks. Let me get over to my slides real quick. Okay. Just bear with me here 1 second. Okay. Okay. Tim, can you see my screen okay?
Yes, I can. Although I think you want to be on 21.
Yes. Sorry, just bear with me 1 second. Okay. All right, folks. So over the next couple of slides, we're going to be talking about how do you actually use the tool and create reports. So this is our time to get our hands dirty. Feel free to follow along in whatever report profile view you have access to, but we're going to go over kind of the greatest hits of reports that you should be really paying attention to as you get up to speed with DAP. So we're going to get familiar with the interface. Now I'm going to show you just kind of an overview in DAP in the GSA agency view. And let me just reload my screen here. We're going to start talking about the audience overview reports and talking about all the features and functionality that you need to be aware of as you get up to speed using the DAP Google Analytics interface. So let's go to audience and overview. And I'm just going to talk through some high-level features and functionalities here. Let me just remove my segmentation here. Okay, so when you first log into DAP, you need to first make sure that you're logged in with your official .gov email address or your official contractor email address if your agency specifically allows you to use that. We oftentimes get a lot of folks contacting the support desk asking why they don't have access to certain reports or why they can't see the DAP account. And inevitably, we see very often people are logged into their personal gmail.com addresses. And of course, we don't grant access to gmail.com addresses, so you're not going to see DAP if you try to log in using your gmail.com address. So you always need to make sure that you're hovering over this little profile icon when you log into Google Analytics to see which specific email address you're logged into. That's going to save you a lot of time with having to send us emails about why you can't see your reports. Trust us, just save yourself some time. Check to see which email address you're logged in under when you log into Google Analytics. The next thing you need to be aware of is this little section in the upper left-hand corner where I'm hovering my cursor. So you'll see here it says GSA Agency Profile. Now, if I click into this, you're going to see the government-wide account, and you'll see there's 3 other properties in here. And within each property, these house all the agency views. So if you're working at CFPB, you would come in, you would find the CFPB view, and you'd click into it. That's where your data is going to live. Now, one thing to note, if you, let's say you work for a sub-agency of the DoD, so let's say you work for the Navy, you're going to have to go into the DoD agency view to find your Navy.mil website. So you need to be cognizant of what is your umbrella agency. We do not create views specifically only for one agency website. You have to basically go in, find your umbrella agency among all the choices here, click into it, and then you're going to need to figure out how to use the tool to filter and slice and dice your data for your specific sub-agency website. And we're going to do that in just a little bit over the next few slides. So if you do not see government-wide account and you're logged in with your official .gov or .mil email address, that means you do not have access to DAP, and you need to contact us at dap@support.digitalgov.gov. Now, some folks will sometimes try to log in and request access. Inevitably, you're going to hear from us directing you back to the support desk to request registration instructions so that you can follow the GSA DAP's program process for registering as an official DAP user. So if you don't see this in your account when you log into Google Analytics, that means you don't have access. Now, one thing that we also see folks kind of struggle with is oftentimes you'll have multiple Google Analytics accounts that you have access to. And inevitably, somebody will say, well, I only have access to one. And then we have to go back to them and say, well, you need to click into this little box here to see all of your accounts, right? So if you click into all accounts, you're now going to see all the different accounts that you have access to. So you need to make sure to look in all of these places. But I highly recommend you click in here if you can't find the digital analytics program, and really look for the account by clicking into this little box here to find your agency view. So that's really important. You got to figure out what umbrella agency your website and sub-agency is part of, so you can figure out where you need to pinpoint the data. Okay, so let's talk about audience. So on the screen here, we have an overview report. Now, I'm not going to go through every report in the audience section, but essentially, this left-hand side of the navigation within Google Analytics houses a bunch of different reports that Google pre-populates with all these different dimensions and metrics like Tim mentioned before. So you need to know why you're going to go into any of these reports. Now, you know, there's a larger question of what is your website mission, your goals, and your KPIs? What type of business questions are you getting asked by your senior management? All of those things, your analytics strategy framework is going to help you understand how to use the tool. You need to know why you're going into a specific section in here to actually pull data. The goal here is not to just randomly click around into reports here until you find something interesting or useful. The goal here is to use the reports, know how to use the reports, and then when you get a question or you're doing a specific type of analysis, go into the tool and then look for the data to try to answer a specific question. So getting back to the audience overview report, this is kind of how the interface looks in DAP as you get up to speed. Now I'm in the GSA agency profile. So within this view, this is going to house all GSA related websites. So it's going to have gsa.gov, gsaauctions.gov, usa.gov. There's going to be a lot of websites in here. And so this is going to be a similar type of experience that you can use when you go back to your job and you start using DAP for your specific website. So let's talk about the audience section of reports. Now, within audience, we like to describe this section of reports as the reports that help you understand who is using your site. So this is the primary purpose of these sections of reports. I'm going to go through briefly the kind of high level highlights of reports that are really important to you, and talk about some functionality. So let's talk about the functionality first before I do a little bit of a deep dive into the audience reports. Now, on the interface here, you have a lot of stuff, right? The overview report does a good job of giving you high-level metrics and then showing you what types of dimensions are available in the rest of the reports within the audience reporting sections. Now, one thing you always need to be careful of when you go into any report, you need to select the date range that is appropriate to the reporting time that you're trying to report on, right? You need to know, what is the date range I'm reporting on? Are you doing a monthly report, a quarterly report? You need to specify that here. Now, you can also do cool things, like you could do a comparison to the previous year, right? I could do April 22nd, 2020 compared to the same day last year, right? And then click apply. So you can start to toggle and use the functionality of the tool to pretty quickly find and compare interesting pieces of data and hopefully glean insights. So let me just reset this here. Now you'll notice here we've got segments. I'm going to talk a little bit about segments later. But just know that a segment is simply a tool that helps you define characteristics of the data that you want to see. So if you want to see a specific slice or subset of data within, let's say, a mobile device report, you could actually create a segment, and we'll do that a little bit later in today's presentation. You could create a segment that says, only show me Android devices being used by folks, or let's say females between the ages of 18 to 24. You could say something like that within a segment and then apply that to the report. And then you could identify different pieces of content that specific device type and age range and demographic data defines in the experience of the reports. It's a super powerful tool. We'll talk a little bit about that later. The next kind of area that you need to be aware of is there's going to be a chart here in any type of standard report. All right. And there's going to be a theme that you see as we go through these different reporting sections that you just need to be aware of. Now you can toggle here to see the trend by hourly, by day. Now I'm looking at one specific day here just so I can have the tool load faster. But just get up to speed when you start playing with DAP and just play around with the visualizations to see what looks interesting and see what might make sense to you. Now, a couple things here. We've got demographics data, we've got system data, we've got mobile data. These are all dimensions that answer the question about our traffic. Who is our traffic, right? What language do they use? What country are they browsing from? What city are they browsing from? What browser is our audience using? What OS is our audience using, and so forth? What type of mobile device are they using? What language are they using to browse my website? All of this is data that Google Analytics tracks out of the box. So this gets really powerful really quickly. Now, I'm going to go on to a couple other really quick reports here just to kind of highlight some areas that you need to start getting up to speed in your DAP journey. I'm going to go down to demographics and just kind of show folks on the webinar today what we're dealing with here. Now, you'll see here we've got a demographics overview report, and you'll see here we have a bunch of different age bands. So we've got 18 to 24, 25 to 34, and so forth. We've got female, male demographics, gender data here, right? Now, this data is not 100%. Depending on how you slice and dice the data, you're going to have different percentages of actual, data available. But in the analytics world, we like to say that analytics is not accounting and data is directional. So if you can have a significant amount of data to infer some type of trend, then that data is going to be pretty interesting to identify and report on different trends about your audience, right? So this all comes into play when you start learning how to use segments, understanding who your audience is, what devices they're browsing on. This data here is super important in understanding, how do people consume content on different devices? From which states are they browsing our website? The sky's the limit here with how you can leverage audience and demographics data. Now, after this overview, I'm going to click into age. And this really just gives you kind of a high-level overview. It helps you drill down into the age bands, right? So we've got, for April 22nd, we've got these ages, age data that was collected. Now, this age data, just to clarify for folks in the webinar, this data is collected by folks who have created a gmail.com address and are logged into that gmail.com address in your browser when you go and visit a website. So if you think about it, the Google ecosystem is capturing this data about you that you're between the ages of 25 and 34, and then when you browse, let's say the GSA.gov, it captures that data about you, right? There's no personally identifiable information available in DAP, just to be clear about that. This is just kind of data that any type of analytics tool is going to be trying to capture about you. And then let's click into gender here.
I just wanted to make a note, Freddie, that as you're showing this, I just wanted to let people know that the demographics feature is an option to turn on in the features of DAP, and that's an implementation issue, but it's not turned on by default. So you may have an implementation where you don't get data for age and gender. It's specifically up to the discretion of the agency whether or not they want to enable that feature.
Right, great call out, Tim. Thank you. Yeah, so looking at gender here, we have female and male, and I just want to kind of highlight one way that you can start to think about using these reports as you get up to speed with DAP. So let me pull in a secondary dimension of device category, and we can start to see what does the mix look like here across gender and device category. So what we see here within this specific day, April 22nd, we've got the female gender on mobile with approximately 29% of all sessions, all traffic to all websites within the GSA view. So this is how you need to interpret the data. Now, why would you want to look at this, or why would I pull this? Well, I can't really tell you that. That has to be something that comes from you and the questions that you're trying to answer about your digital strategy and about how people are using your website. So we can't be the ones to tell you how to think about what questions to answer. You have to get those questions from your senior leadership, your stakeholders, your boss, your development team, to then answer those questions to help answer questions to guide your strategy. Okay, let's look a little bit more into one other area here. Let's go into mobile. So mobile, obviously, most websites are starting to move in the direction of being mobile first. Understanding the percentage share of different devices, especially mobile phones, is really important for understanding how your website needs to evolve to meet accessibility and usability requirements on different device types, right? And so you can use this mobile overview report and simply pull up the number of sessions, and we see about 29% of all GSA websites happen on mobile devices, 67% on desktop, and 3.5% on tablet. So you can start to see the power of really looking at these different cuts of the data about who your audience is and what devices they're using. Now, one other area I want to go illustrate for folks here is geo. So let's talk about geo and location and then language. So, we sometimes get requests from different agencies about, for an email campaign or a social media campaign, how did this look by state? Well, you can do that. You can actually go into the geo location page. You can start to see that we capture a lot of data about location. Now, location data is captured using an IP address, but we anonymize all IP addresses, and so these location data points are approximate. There's nothing personally identifiable here. And so if I drill into United States, you can start to see what types of data are available. We see here we've got region, which is the state, right? So we have Virginia is the top state driving traffic to all GSA websites. So we've got about 10% of all traffic hitting any GSA website that we're tracking, and so forth. You could actually create segmentation based off of region or state to understand what what email campaigns are resonating with your audience in Virginia versus California, for example. The sky's the limit here. How you slice and dice this data, it's very powerful, but it can get very confusing. So you really have to know why you're going into the tool and what you're trying to accomplish by answering a specific question about strategy. So you need to link the two. I highly encourage everyone on the webinar to go through all the reports here, click in here, see what's interesting, what resonates. You're not going to be using all of these reports every day. Some of these reports I never use. So you really need to get acclimated with the reporting infrastructure here, know what reports are most useful to you for answering your questions and which reports are not so useful. You do not need to use every report here, but you do need to be strategic about which reports you do use. Okay. The next report I want to talk about is the Pages report. Now, the Pages report is one of the most important reports in Google Analytics. Just going to give you a quick overview of how to use this report, what it's used for, why would you want to use it, what does it mean? All right, so I'm going to go down to behavior, site content, and all pages. Okay, now I'm on April 22nd. I'm in the GSA agency view. And you'll see here under page, this dimension here is the page dimension, and you'll see over here all the different page views, unique page views, and all these other metrics, right? So you'll remember Tim spoke to the concept of every report has a dimension and then a bunch of metrics. So this is literally what you're gonna see in every report, combination of page and a combination of dimensions and metrics. Now you'll see here, the top page here out of all GSA related sites is secure.login.gov. Now that makes sense. We have beta.sam.gov, we've got search.usa.gov, we've got GSA Advantage. If you think about the specific profile, the specific view that you need to actually toggle into to pull reporting, you're going to be faced with a similar challenge. You're going to be faced with all the websites that are classified as, for example, DoD websites, Navy.mil, Army.mil, anything else related to the DoD is going to be in the DoD view. So you really need to know what agency you work for and go searching for that agency in this little drop down here within DAP. So let's talk through the interface here. Now you'll notice here we've got the same date picker. We've got segmentation. We'll talk a little bit about that later. We've got a couple different dimensions here that are specific to the page dimension. So, and then we've got our metrics, right? Now, for my example, I'm going to use USA.gov. And I'm going to choose USA.gov / coronavirus, just as an example. Let's take a quick look at what this page looks like. So this is USA.gov / coronavirus. This is the government response to coronavirus. It has a bunch of information, a bunch of helpful links for the public to access, right? So this is an information consumption page, right? Everything that USA.gov can think to find to provide access to the public is going to be included here. And so we are capturing this page in DAP Google Analytics. Now, I want to show you the functionality here next to the primary dimension. So we currently have a page selected. I'm going to toggle over to page title. Now, page title is associated with a page, and you'll see here that removed all of my results that I had just filtered. So you can search by the page title. So for coronavirus, let me just look at let me show you the source code here. So for their page title, they have government response to coronavirus, COVID-19. So let me show you what that looks like in the report. So I'm going to copy and paste this in here. And here we go. You now see the page title of the page that I was looking at before. So all to say, there's interesting use cases for why you would pull page title, why you would even look at that. Let's say, for example, you're doing an SEO audit and you need to understand what are your content creators putting into the page title attribute. Page title is an important piece of data for understanding how your website is getting indexed, how Google understands your pages. Do you have relevant keyword phrases in your page titles, etc. So this is a useful way to do content auditing by using page titles. So that exists here up next to the primary dimension. I'm going to toggle back to page. Now you'll notice here, we've got a ton of data here. We have 131,179 pages in the GSA view for today. So I want to highlight some additional functionality here. Now you'll see here, you can toggle and pull this data, a max of 5,000 rows of data per page up to the 131,179 pages. So the idea here is that you're going to find a way of pinpointing the exact data that you need to pull. And then once you have the data loaded, and then hopefully it loads, there we go. Sometimes it takes a little while to get there. You're then going to figure out, okay, I'm looking at content engagement and all these different pages. I'm going to do, I think I misspelled that. I'm going to do the coronavirus. Right, so we've got all these pages here with coronavirus, but I'm specifically interested in this USA.gov one. Or let's say maybe you want to understand all the different coronavirus pages that exist. You could come here, okay, there's 66 pages. So the idea here is once you pinpoint your data to answer a specific question, you then need to get the data out. So you can click on export and export that to a Google Sheet or an Excel file, and then do additional analysis and visualizations on the data, right? Now, let's back out here. I'm gonna go specifically look at the USA.gov coronavirus page and show you how to use a secondary dimension. Okay, so let's say you wanna understand for the coronavirus pages, what device types are our audience using to access this important information. So what you can do is you can click on a secondary dimension, and then you have access to all these different qualifying dimensions that help you further tease out characteristics about the data and the story that you can tell using these characteristics. So I'm going to type in device category. And by the way, you're not expected to know all of these dimensions out of the gate. Knowing what to pull and when is highly dependent on how often you use the tool and how skilled you get at using the tool. So over time, you're going to know what dimensions to pull, how to combine different dimensions together, and why. So I've pulled in a secondary dimension of device category, and now I can see the interplay between desktop, mobile, and tablet for this coronavirus page. Now, there are a few pages here that have a / after coronavirus. That's a function of the CMS that they're using. Sometimes, in terms of how analytics tools track pages, sometimes if a CMS, the content management system, renders a page with and without a /, they will show up as two different pages in your analytics reporting. So it would behoove you, if you see something like this, you need to work with your development team to figure out, okay, how do we remove the slash, for example, or do we want the slash? Do we want that to be our canonical URL that is the source of truth, right? So these are all important things. But essentially, if I want to understand engagement with this specific piece of content, I now have a way to quickly do that by pulling in a secondary dimension of device category, and then I see the interplay of unique page views on desktop, mobile, and tablet. Okay. Now, there is one really cool hidden report here that I want to highlight, and that is the navigation summary report. Now, any analytics tool is really bad at splicing together the whole user journey. And think about it this way. We all have a bunch of different tabs open in our browsers. So let's say you have 10 different tabs from, CNN.com that are open all in the same browser. Well, anytime those tabs load, they get attributed to the same session. And so it's really difficult to know which tab you're browsing first, right? There's a lot of noise in there. So all analytics tools have challenges when trying to show you the full user journey. So if you browsed 100 different pages on GSA.gov, for example, it's really difficult for me to tell you sequentially, okay, this one specific user browsed pages 1 through 100 in such and such a way. There's no way to do it. Now, the purpose of the navigation summary report is that it does give you a very small subsection of that user journey. It gives you kind of 3 steps within a user journey. So let me show you how to think about using this. Let's say you have a piece of content that you're really curious, how did my traffic find this piece of content? And once they landed on that piece of content, where did they go next? Well, this is the report to help you do that. So basically, you see here, we've got a previous page path, we've got the page in question, and then we have a next page path. So you're gonna click on current selection, and you're gonna either choose from one of these pages here, or you're gonna search. So I'm gonna search for coronavirus to find the USA.gov page. And now, this is my current selection is USA.gov coronavirus. This is this page right here. Now I see the journey from how traffic came from other places to enter this piece of page, consume it, and then where did they go next? So if we look here, we had about 63%, almost 64% of entrances landing on this page, okay? The other 36.51% came from other pages on USA.gov. So the entrances happened on USA.gov/coronavirus when this coronavirus page was a landing page. So that's what this means with entrance. The previous pages this means that any page from some other page on USA.gov, somebody clicked on the link from USA.gov or disasters and emergencies and went to USA.gov/coronavirus as their next page in that step. Okay, so we see.
Freddie, I'm sorry, I don't want to interrupt, but I just want to let you know that time-wise, we're looking like we're running a bit behind. So when you're done describing this particular report, let's move to take a break, and then we will regroup.
Sounds good. Okay, so from this USA.gov/coronavirus page, we then see we have exits. We see about 73% just simply exit this page, and about 28% move on to the next pages. So we see here they go back to USA.gov or back to these other pages. So this is a little helpful report for understanding, perhaps UX challenges, understanding some part of the flow of the user journey, and is really useful in understanding, specific flows into specific pieces of content. Okay, so that's the pages report. Tread carefully with this one. You need to know how to leverage it, why you're using it. Now, let me just quickly go here and back to the all pages report and just talk about filtering. We go back to the Explorer. Okay. So you'll notice here, I have a filter that's turned on. Let me turn this off here. Okay, I'm going to remove my secondary dimension. Just want to illustrate. We go back to the all. Now, one thing you have to be aware of in any report is you have the ability to filter. So what that is it's simply a search box where you type in words that are included in your URL of your website. So I typed in coronavirus, it looked for coronavirus. Now, if I have a secondary dimension that I add, like device category, I then need to click on edit to filter by my secondary dimension using an advanced filter. So I'm going to say I only want to see mobile devices, for example. Okay, and here I've filtered using this box, the first primary dimension here, and then I've filtered using an advanced filter, the secondary dimension. So this is how you need to be thinking about your data as you go through any of these reports. These are fundamental foundational concepts that need to be integrated into how you use the tool. This is how you use the tool. Tim, do you want to take a break now, or do you want me to keep on going through the next couple of slides?
Yeah, I think let's break now since we've been going longer than 90 minutes. If we could just take a 5-minute break, folks, and we'll come back at about 3:40 Eastern. So feel free to take a bathroom break or grab yourself a drink, and then we'll kick back up in 5 minutes.
Hey, Tim and Freddie, this is Min calling from OVW.
Hi.
Hi, so I sent you guys an email, but the Google meeting link isn't working for me, so I'm calling in, but I'm wondering if you guys know what's going on with that.
It's very possible that your agency blocks Google services.
I see.
So apologies about that, but we do have recordings. We're recording this session, and then we also have recordings of previous sessions we've done in the past already up. So you'll be able to look at video once we'll send up our follow-up email with the link to our YouTube channel, and from there you'll be able to rewatch with video. Apologies.
Okay, great. That works for me. I'm just gonna stay on the call then. Okay, great.
Yep. Alrighty. Felt like a quick 5 minutes. Freddie, are you ready to get us going with landing pages? Oh, Freddie, you might be muted. Now we can hear you.
Great. Let me go ahead and present. Can y'all see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Great. Okay. All right, so let's talk about the landing page report. This is going to be your new best friend. This is going to be one of the most important reports that you use. So I'm going to show you how to use the report, what it looks like, what to be thinking of. So let's go ahead and take a look in Google Analytics. So we see here we have behavior, site content, and I'm going to go to landing pages. Now you'll notice we were looking at the page report, the all pages report with page views and unique page views. Now the landing page report has sessions. This is the type of dimension that, or type of metric that we recommend using when you're doing any type of reporting. Now the landing page is where the session first begins. So anywhere that you land on a site, that's going to be your landing page. That's where your session begins. It gets recorded in Google Analytics by the JavaScript firing on page load. And then anything else you do during that session gets attributed to this landing page, right? So this is how to think about this landing page. Now you can use secondary dimensions here to break this down further qualify this data, but you're going to be using the landing pages report for anything like marketing reporting. Is my email traffic, are my email campaign sending traffic to a specific landing page? You could actually figure that out. What's the most popular referral site sending traffic to my website? You could figure that out using the landing page. So anything offsite that lands on your website, it gets attributed to the landing page's dimension, and this is where you can report on it. Okay, so quick high-level kind of thoughts on landing pages. A couple years ago, the DAP team did analysis and found that about 26%, so about a quarter of all landing page traffic happened on home pages. About 74% of all landing page traffic happened on all other pages. So all to say that traffic enters your website sideways most of the time. So what do I mean by sideways? Well, traffic is never going to enter your home page every time. People are doing Google searches. This is how people interact with websites today. They're looking for information on Google. They find a specific page that resonates with the intent of their search on Google. They enter that page. So all to say, you need to be thinking about how these different kind of trends in search engine optimization, your email campaigns, how people are entering your site in different ways at different pages and pieces of content. You need to be thinking about that as you look at the landing pages report. Okay. What do you learn from landing pages? Let's talk about that. So landing pages can be combined with different metrics to get additional insights. For example, the bounce rate. So let's say you have users landing on the index pages, so your home pages, and then they bounce right out. Well, that could be a problem with perhaps your information architecture of how your website is organized, link labeling, page organization. Now, knowing where your visitors land helps you get insight into the user experience with your site. So this is another way to think about what you can glean from the landing pages report. So for example, what is their first view of your site? Does it help them to understand the purpose of your site? Can they navigate from landing pages, right? So when you're in the landing pages report, the most important things to be paying attention to are sessions. And then of course you want to be looking at bounce rate, right? Whether bounce rate is good or bad, that's going to depend on your specific scenario, but these are the main metrics, in my opinion, that you should be looking at first. And then you can start looking at things like average session duration, pages per session. It all really depends on what question you're trying to answer about your digital strategy. Okay, couple quick things we want to talk about. We just want to touch upon this concept of scope. Now, this is a very advanced topic that a lot of folks in the analytics world have challenges with, but we want to mention it very high level, just so that you're aware of the caveats that exist in reporting. So Google Analytics captures data anytime the JavaScript fires in buckets. So there's a user bucket, a session bucket, and a hit level bucket. Now, different dimensions and metrics live in a specific bucket. Now, you'll see in this example illustration I have here, I have user. This is kind of the top level of how the data is collected. You'll see things like city, gender, users, new users collected at this level. A user is then built upon by having session buckets. So in the session bucket, you can have things like a landing page or source medium or sessions or bounce rate. And then the hit level bucket has things like the page dimension, event category, page view, and so forth. Now, all to say, you need to tread carefully when combining dimensions and metrics from different buckets, especially in custom reports. Certain dimensions and metrics should not be used together because they will give you incorrect data. So it is possible to create reports that can be easily misinterpreted. So one of the biggest defenders that we typically see is when you pull together a report looking at the page dimension with sessions. Now, what you should be pulling is landing page with sessions, not page with sessions. You need to use page with page views or unique page views. However, the tool lets you still build these types of reports with an incorrect combination of dimensions and metrics. So just be on the lookout for that as you get more advanced. We have a webinar here that you can check out on this topic. We also have Google documentation for you to explore later on if you have specific questions. All right. Tim, I'll hand it over to you for what our visitors downloading.
All right, thank you. So hopefully we can all see my screen now. So I've learned a couple things. Thank you, Freddie, for that great overview of a bunch of the reports. Number one, I've learned that Freddie and I like to talk too much. Number two, I've learned that you all are probably not going to get out of here before 5. So we're going to end at 5 for sure, but we still have quite a bit to cover, and we're going to do our best to show you as much as we can here. So I want to talk about the events sections. And someone just asked a question just a little while ago in the chat about whether or not you could track PDF downloads. So we're going to talk about what events are in general, and then also show you some of the added value of the digital analytics program, being that we have some events that are already coded for you so that they're already tracking, that they wouldn't be in your independent Google Analytics implementation. So if we go to the events report, which is in behavior, events, and if I click on top events, an event is something that happens after a page load. So it's a user behavior or user action that happens post page load. So typically after a page load, Google Analytics wouldn't be doing anything. But you can configure these things that are called events so that when someone, let's say, clicks on a button or downloads a PDF or clicks on a link that leads them outside of the site, you can get special hits sent to Google Analytics. And the way that events are structured are in 3 tiers: event category, event action, and event label. And when we think about this, event category is the most broad, and then it gets more granular with an action and more granular with a label. And I will show you this so that you can understand it a little bit better. With the digital analytics program, we automatically track some specific events for you. We track outbound link clicks. What that means is if you have a link on your site that leads outside of your site and someone clicks on that, we track it for you. We track downloads. Here's the download category. The way we do that is Google Analytics looks at all the links on your pages. And if it sees that your pages end in .pdf, .doc, .xls, MP3, whatever, it says, oh, that's a file that someone could quote unquote download. When we say download, I don't mean necessarily that they download it to their hard drive. I know that in most cases, modern browsers open PDFs in just a new tab. That still counts. It's basically a link click to a file. That's in our download category. We also have outbound downloads, which is basically if you are linking to a file that is hosted elsewhere. So let's say if you were linking to a file that was an OPM file, but you worked at the Department of Interior, then that would go into the outbound download category. We also track mail to clicks. So when you have content or contact me sections where we have mail to clicks, things like that. So, but the big one that I feel like everybody really always wants to track is the download stuff. So if I were to click into download now, it's going to break it down further from the top level event category to event action. Event action, being more granular, specifies specific file types. So then if I were to click PDF, for example, now it would show me all of the PDFs that have been clicked, and there's 106,000 rows of the most clicked PDFs in the GSA profile of Google Analytics, of the DAP account. If you wanted to find a specific file that you were looking for, you could certainly search for it. Like, I don't know if there's a per diem list or something. I'm doing this totally on the seat of my pants. There's a per diem bulletin. There's a couple things that have per diem mentioned in it. So you could look for it there. One thing that is difficult about this is that, as the same thing with the all pages report, the data is all combined for all GSA sites. So I recommend recreating an events report as a custom report, which Freddie's going to go over in a little while, that you could basically recreate this, but you could limit it only to your domain. So I use the example of, or here, analytics.usa.gov, for example. We have a page where people can download CSVs of our data. So I can recreate the events report that we see here by rebuilding it with all the same metrics and dimensions, except I can add a filter at the end that says only show me data for analytics.usa.gov. And then you're able to really get a nice site-specific list of the events that are happening. Of note, similar to the all pages report, one thing you could do here is if you isolate a particular file, you could then say, oh, well, which pages was that downloaded from? And you can add a secondary dimension. You can only, unfortunately, add one extra dimension in the default reporting section. But you could add a secondary dimension for page, and then it would say, oh, here's the page where people download that. GSA.gov. So it's looking like it's the payroll calendar. So people want to know when they get paid, right? And if I go there, here we go. There's the file, probably the 2021, and I could click that, and it would open up the payroll calendar. And that is one of the top downloaded PDFs of all GSA sites. So that's pretty interesting. That's a quick overview of events. And there's a couple things that are interesting about events. So obviously, I told you about the ones that we record for you. You probably saw in the event category when I was in the top event section, there were some other ones. Those are events that folks at websites run by GSA actually encoded themselves, and they're recording other things. If you are looking to try to add events of your own, I would ask that you reach out to us and talk to us about it, just because if you add in events where you get millions and millions of clicks, it could potentially affect how much we have to pay for Google Analytics. So we offer the main ones, the downloads, outbound link clicks, mail to links, telephone clicks. We also automatically track telephone clicks, as in if someone's on a mobile device and you have a phone number and the mobile device recognizes it and gives you that little link that you can just hit with your finger and then it makes a phone call. We also track that. But if you were to do more, I would ask that you talk to us about it. Now, here's the question we always get about the PDF stuff. If you include a direct link to a PDF in an email or social media post, it won't record in Google Analytics. And again, this is like a think in your own head. Why do you think that happens? Is it because PDFs cannot execute Google Analytics JavaScript? Is it because the PDF was not tagged with query parameters? Or is it because links in email or social media can't be tracked in Google Analytics at all? The answer is A. So I explained to you a little bit about how it works. The Google Analytics JavaScript only can be put on HTML pages. It has to be an actual web page, and the browser has to execute the JavaScript to be able to record data. A PDF has nothing behind it. Imagine a PDF like just a sheet of paper. There's no code behind it. It's just showing you a file. And so if you take one of those PDF links, like you take this link and you tweet it out, payroll calendar PDF, people can click on it in Twitter and it will open the PDF. But you're bypassing anywhere that Google Analytics exists. This is being opened from somewhere that you aren't controlling a Google Analytics tag on it. So the answer is no, you can't track it that way. The way that you could track PDFs that you put direct links to in an email or social media or something would be via your server logs, because the server logs could tell you how many times it was served, period. But Google Analytics can only track it when someone clicks on a link on your site. So that's important to remember. Events and bounce rate. So we talked about how much people dislike a high bounce rate. One of the interesting things about events is that if you trigger an event that is classified as what we call an interaction event, it will negate a bounce. So because DAP automatically tracks outbound link clicks, downloads, outbound downloads, mail tos, telephone clicks, all these things like that, if somebody lands on a page on your site and they click on a PDF file to download a form and then they leave, they are not a bounce anymore. Because once they have an event that's considered an interaction, and you can encode events to be interaction or non-interaction, all of the default DAP events that we track are interaction events. So if they click an outbound link that you said, hey, for more information, check out your state's resources here, and they click that, no more bounce. If they download a file, no more bounce. So that's important to know as well, because if you see a page that has a high bounce rate and the main goal is that you're asking people to use it to find their local version or something like that, that's something that you'll want to know. So that's also a reason why you can have a page that has a lot of people that view it only once, but it has very low bounce rate, and it's because people are actually taking some sort of interaction on that page. Okay, the next type of reports that I want to review are so figuring out who your audience is. So things that you can know with Google Analytics. Theoretically, you can know new and returning users, but we talked about why that is flawed. You can know language in the sense that you know the language their browser is set to. Obviously, Google Analytics cannot reach into your brain and figure out what your first language is. It knows what language you've set your browser to. So you could be in China, but an English-speaking student and have your browser set to English, and it's still going to read English. So that's that. Or a person from a Spanish-speaking country could be in the United States and using a browser that's set to English, even though their first language is Spanish. So just know that. Location, Freddie talked about it a little bit. We get a relative location because we anonymize IP addresses. It's not perfect, but it's relative. We used to be able to tell internet service providers, but very recently, Google just got rid of that. I don't know why. We really enjoyed being able to actually use segments to segment for ISPs and networks, especially because lots of government agencies have ISPs that are named after them. So one of the questions we get often is, how do I remove traffic from internal users? Well, previously, I used to be able to say, hey, probably the VA has an ISP that's actually called like Veterans Affairs Internet or something. And you can actually exclude that with a segment, but they got rid of that. So now we have no good way of deciphering internal and external traffic, unfortunately, because theoretically you could also do it with IP addresses, but we don't record IP addresses. So that's a bit of a bummer, but I can tell you that based on when we had the ability to do ISP stuff, our rough calculation was that most sites never had more than 5% internal visits. And DAP is only for public-facing sites, so we're not dealing with intranet stuff. You can know what sites refer people to you. We talked about demographics a little bit. That's an optional feature. If you want to turn that on, you can email us. And then, okay, so what you can't know, as I mentioned, we don't collect person identifiable information. We don't collect IP addresses. Google can't tell you what's going through your user's head as they click through. Google doesn't know their cat's name yet. Who knows? I hope we don't ever get to the point where Google can tell me what my cat's name is. All right, let's talk about acquisition stuff. So this is a huge section of importance for folks, especially if you work in outreach, because you want to be able to accurately tell if your outreach in social media or in emails or any other things, if it's succeeding. You want to know if you're actually driving traffic to your site. So let's look at the reports here. I have them here, but I'm gonna review them a little bit as we get in. Excuse me. So under acquisition, if we go under all traffic, we've got this thing called the channels report. The channels report gives us the most high-level description here of what percentage of our traffic came from various different sources. And again, this is to all GSA websites. Once we get to segmentation and filtering in a few minutes, Freddie's going to show you how you can specify your site. But right now, we're just getting a feel for it. Referrals. If I click on referrals, and I told you a referral is from a third-party site, it's saying, okay, well, now we can see these are the referrals, where they're coming from. Now, of note, we've got GSA websites in here because, for example, USA.gov could link to GSA.gov. But once we can limit it to a specific site, it'll be a little more descriptive. So the number one site that directs traffic to GSA sites is usajobs.gov. I'm guessing it probably directs people to, oh, interesting. So let's see here. If I add a secondary dimension for page, it should show us the whole section that it's going to. Of course, it's taken forever. I'll go over here and have a second one. Okay, so that makes sense. USA Jobs is sending people to login.gov because USA Jobs leverages login.gov as their login mechanism now. And since login.gov is run out of GSA, that accounts for most of the traffic here. So that is how you can look at referral traffic. Organic search. Here comes a big question. Somebody asked this in the chat. If I click on organic search right now in the channels report, this used to be a bread and butter report. People always went here a long time ago when Google Analytics was more in its infant stages. People would come here and say, oh, what are the keywords that people are putting in Google to get to my site? The problem is what you see now is 92% of the information is what is said not provided. And what that is Google basically started obscuring via HTTPS. They started obscuring the keywords that people were using to get to your site from Google Analytics. Now, ironically, they still actually track it. It's just you have to use a different tool called Google Search Console. So if you don't already have Google Search Console set up for your site, I recommend you do it. You can link the information into Google Analytics here by doing some stuff in the admin panel. You can't do it with this account, though. You can't link Search Console to the DAP account. So you have to have your own standalone Google Analytics account to do it. But even if you don't link it to Google Analytics, Search Console has its own interface that you should use, and you can get the information from Google about which keywords people were using in Google to get to your site. Okay, let's go back and talk about some of the other ones. Direct traffic. I think I have a slide on direct traffic. Aha, here's my question. This is even before I talk about it. What ways is direct traffic inflated? Now, let me give you a little bit of a basis first. Direct traffic theoretically means somebody literally typed your URL in the URL bar up here. That is not the actual case and how it plays out. And so I would ask you to think about in your head, what ways do you think direct traffic is inflated? Is it clicks from shortened links, referrals from HTTPS to HTTP, clicks from email clients, from offline email clients, clicks to links that have 302 redirects, or clicks from mobile apps? And the answer here is a trick question. Every single one of these things, if you do it, will make it look like direct traffic. So direct traffic, similar to like how user is not human, direct traffic does not actually mean somebody put the URL in the URL bar and typed it out. What it does mean is that somebody landed on your page, and when Google ripped open that backpack I was talking about, you didn't have something called a referrer. And a referrer is what you carry with you when you travel from Facebook or from WAPO or from some other site. But if you show up at the doorstep of that new website and Google Analytics looks in your backpack and you have no referrer, it funnels you into direct traffic because it says, oh, there's no referrer, it must have come directly rather than from Google or somewhere else. So these are all the things that cause referrers to get stripped out of your backpack. Link shorteners, except for t.co. But as far as I know, every other link shortener other than t.co, that means Bitly, Owly, all these other things, they strip the referrer out so that traffic clicked on those look like direct. And I have had conversations with people who work in social media, and they say, you know, I really don't understand. We've got such a good following. People are engaged on social media, but we're not getting any clicks on any of our posts. And the reason was because they were using like Bitly, and all the traffic was looking like it was direct instead of coming from social media. I'm going to teach you how to get around that in the next section. Referrals from HTTPS to HTTP, you know, that is what it is. Not a whole lot you can do, except the whole internet will be HTTPS soon. Clicks from offline email clients is another big one. I'm going to teach you how to do campaign URLs, and that can help. 302 redirects is a temporary redirect. It's a bad way to do redirects. It also causes problems. And then mobile apps as well. Oops. So how do you get around this? You use what's called the campaign URL builder. So here is an example of what it looks like, and I'm going to come back to this in a minute because I want to talk about it first. Firstly, what are campaigns? A campaign is an external marketing initiative, whether it be by email, social media, newsletters. It could be a paid campaign for search keywords or something like that, although we don't do a bunch of that. In any campaign, you include a link back to your site. So when I'm talking about campaigns, and it could be as simple as you're posting stuff on LinkedIn. How can we measure the success of our campaigns or campaign outreach? And the way that you do that is with campaign URLs. And campaign URLs are basically, you add language onto the end of your normal link URL that tells Google Analytics to record certain pieces of data. And the way it does that is via these specific query parameters. And for Google Analytics, it's UTM_source, UTM_medium, and UTM_campaign. That's the secret language. It stands for Urchin Tracking Module. Urchin was the analytics program before it became Google Analytics, and they just kept the terminology. So how do you build campaign URLs? What you see here is it broken down by colors. You've got the light green, which is the actual URL link that you want to send your users. And then you've got a question mark. And after that, you've got UTM source, and you say the source, whether it be newsletter, Google, Facebook, Twitter. You specify the medium, so email, social, whatever that may look like. And you specify a campaign name that you create. So it could be as unique to be a specific tweet. Or sometimes it could be a campaign like, holiday fundraising, and you just have a campaign name that actually encompasses lots of different forms of outreach. So it really depends on your specific strategy. You need to think about how you're going to set that up. And the campaign URL builder, you can just Google for it. If you Google campaign URL builder, you'll find it, or you've got the link in the slide. I have an example here from join.tts.gsa.gov. And let's say I was sending out job posts for a product manager in a newsletter that we do via email. So you put in your information in source, medium, and campaign name, and it will spit out the URL for you. Now, what's really interesting, if you're not familiar with campaign URLs, is that anything after a question mark in a URL doesn't change where you land. So if I were to use this, I just go to join.tts.gov. There's a product manager position. And as an example of this is something I could do, I could type anything I want after that question mark. It wouldn't change where I land. But because I'm typing UTM source, UTM medium, and UTM campaign, when this page loads, Google sees this and says, oh, I need to capture that information and send it to the campaigns report within Google Analytics. So if you're on this call right now and you work in outreach or marketing and you don't use campaign URLs, please consider doing so, especially if you shorten links. So that's the secret sauce about link shorteners. If you were to take join.tts.gsa.gov and shorten it via bit.ly and put it in a tweet, when someone clicked on that, the traffic would show up in Google Analytics as direct. If you take this link and you shorten it in bit.ly and you put it in Twitter, when someone lands here, it will come in and it will show up. Not only will it show up in the channels report with the correct source and medium, it will be funneled into whatever you say, social, email, referral, whatever. It will also go down here into the campaigns report, which is the next report I wanted to show you. And see, here are some campaign names. Somebody named a campaign December 2019 launch, and that got 2,800 sessions and 2,500 users. Now, if I click into this, and I have not done this previously, so I don't know what it's going to show us. Cool. So we've got two different forms that it was using. It's from USA Gov, and they're tracking it via a redirect, so they're labeling it there. You could, for example, have the same campaign name. Let's say the campaign name was Summer Drive. And within Summer Drive, you put that same campaign name in the campaign URL, but you have a source and medium of newsletter, email, and Twitter social, and Facebook social, and LinkedIn social. And it would show up here in the campaign section in the first page, the all pages. It would show you Summer Drive, and it would give you your aggregate outreach numbers. So how many total sessions did the Summer Drive campaign bring you? But if you clicked within it, then in this second click, it would break down and say, oh, you had 50,000 sessions from your Summer Drive campaign. But within it, you find out, 5,000 were from Facebook, 7,000 were from Twitter, and 37,000 or whatever the remainder was from your email, for example. So this is like really, really, really powerful in terms of your outreach. Very important to know. We have done an entire webinar devoted, a 1-hour webinar devoted to campaign URLs. You can find it. It's called measuring campaigns. I think if you'll find it if you go to our list of pre-recorded webinars. We looked at referral traffic. We looked at organic search. We talked about why organic search doesn't give you the right information, but get Search Console to help you out with that. Search keyword report. So the search keyword report is actually down in behavior. If you see a site search, and then we've got search terms. So I just wanted to bring this to your attention. We're not going to go over it very closely. But the difference between the reports is that search keywords are coming from external sources like Google. This is talking about your site search terms. And again, you can recreate this very specific to your specific website, where you can see what people are putting in once they land on your site in the site search box, this area. So you can also do analysis of the top things people are looking for once they get to your site. And we've seen a lot of folks have really good success with being able to streamline the content, particularly on their home pages, by doing analysis of the site search terms. Again, I mentioned Search Console can be connected to your independently managed GA account. And it also, Search Console also is used to monitor server errors and site visibility in Google. So I highly recommend Search Console for everybody. Okay, do we have questions?
Taking a quick look for you, Tim. It does not look like we have any other questions.
Great. I think I'm passing it off to you for our final section here, segments and custom reports. And you got 45 minutes, Freddie.
Yep. All right. Let me go ahead and share my screen. You can stop presenting. Great. Okay, folks, so this next section, we're going to talk about how to find your own data using advanced segments. So in the previous slides where I was talking about filters and advanced filters, that's one way of slicing and dicing your data. But there's another way that I alluded to in the beginning of today's webinar, and that's called segments. So we're going to talk about segments, how to think about them, how to put them together, how to use them. So let's dive in. So the concept of segments is like so. Unsegmented data shows users like this on the left-hand side of your screen with this person with just the orange color. Segmented data shows your users like on the right-hand side of the screen. These are the folks in blue. So by using segments, you are further qualifying the data that you're pulling in any report to specifically meet specific characteristics that you get to define in your segment. So for example, if you want to see all the landing pages that your users land on, but you only want to understand a subset of that data. So for example, people using iPhone 7s between the ages of 35 to 44 from the city of San Francisco, you could build a segment that encapsulates those three qualifiers so that you can only pinpoint your landing page traffic from users on iPhone 7s between the ages of 35 to 44 with traffic originating from San Francisco. You could do that. That's the power of segmentation. And this is going to be one of the tools that you use on a regular basis. So you need to get up to speed on how to use segments. So let's talk about this a little bit. And I'm going to try and illustrate some things pretty briefly to just give you a taste of what you're up against and how you need to start thinking about your data. So remember our landing pages report. I'm going to show you some examples there, and specifically I'm going to call out an example of referral traffic. I'm going to show you how to conceptually think about segmentation. All right, so let me dive into Google Analytics. Okay, so I'm still in the GSA agency view here. So this has all of the GSA websites. Now, specifically, I have everything in here. So what I'm going to do, like I showed you before, I'm going to show you the coronavirus page. I'm going to filter for that really quickly. And let's say for whatever reason, your boss is asking you, what is the device interplay for the USA.gov coronavirus page? So are people accessing it more on desktop, mobile, or tablet? Well, you can actually use segments to filter and slice and dice this data. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on this little add segment box here. Now, I've pre-made some segments for myself today just to kind of illustrate the concepts. I'm going to choose a mobile segment. Now, let's go into this segment to see the logic that you need to be aware of how to use. Now, out of the box, Google creates mobile segments for you called mobile traffic. So I'll show you how to get to that in just a sec. But at its core, a mobile segment relies on these conditions. Device category exactly matches mobile. So that's how we're defining the mobile experience. Now, really quickly, let me just show you the mobile traffic segment. This is out of the box. You don't need to create these. You can just select this and this will work. Let me go back to my pre-made segments here. I'm going to apply a mobile segment here. I'm going to remove all users. And let's say I want to understand mobile versus desktop. I'm going to add in a desktop segment. Now, one thing, Google does not give you a desktop segment out of the box. So you just be aware you have to go in, basically create this one from scratch and simply say device category exactly matches desktop. So let me show you what this looks like. Okay, so we have our mobile segment, we have our desktop segment, we have our landing pages report, we have a landing page filtered down to usa.gov/coronavirus. And now we have our two segments that we've applied, and now we get the session data that happened on mobile versus desktop. So now we can start to do some interesting calculations and understand how people are using different device types to access this content. So this is the power of using segmentation to get at specific questions that you get to define up front in your segments. Now, I want to highlight just kind of the concept of creating a segment. So I've been using some very general ideas here. So I'm just going to show you how to think about creating a segment. So we've got a test segment here. Remember I mentioned you could get very specific and pinpoint using any type of criteria you want. So let's say I want to look at the ages of 35 to 44. I could literally just check that off. Let's see, I was talking about the city. San Francisco, so you could do this. Okay, and then you can add in another qualifier, and you could say, let's say device category mobile. Now, when you create a segment, it's going to update in real time over here on the right-hand side. So now you can see there's 46 sessions that using the data, the qualifiers of demographics and conditions of San Francisco and mobile, you can create this segment, and it's going to show you all of those rules that you've set up in the segment and apply it to your report. So this is how to think about using segments. Now, we can't tell you what qualifications you need to add. You need to figure that out on your own, depending on what questions that you're using. Now, let me show you something else that could be interesting. You could get really creative with how you use any of these segments. Let's say I want to understand referral traffic. I want to understand landing pages that receive referral traffic. So I'm going to get out of coronavirus, and I'm going to go into the full data set that we have here, and I'm going to switch up into, let's say, a different type of segment that I've created called webinar referral traffic landing on usa.gov/corona. Let me actually do webinar referral traffic. Let me show you how I've created this. So now you can create segments that help you pinpoint specific landing pages where traffic from, let's say, a referral source, a third-party website, is sending traffic to your landing pages on your site. You could do a referral traffic segment of medium exactly matches referral, right? So I'm going to apply this segment. And just show you what this looks like. So now I have a list of all the landing pages within the GSA where third-party websites linked to our site and sent referral traffic. So you can, the whole point here being is that you can create any number of combinations of specific use cases where you can actually identify and use segments to identify interesting questions about your data. The sky's the limit here. How you use the tool, how you use the segments is going to totally depend on what questions you're trying to answer. So for example, I can also do organic if I wanted. And this is going to give me a different cut of the data. Now, obviously, you'd want to rename the segment to organic traffic, but this is kind of the idea here. This can help you pinpoint how different types of traffic are landing and where they're landing on your site. Okay, so that's segmentation. Next, I want to talk about custom reports. Now, custom reports are a way of pulling the exact same data in your left-hand nav here in the standard reports, but it's a faster, easier, not necessarily easier, but it's easier for us, but it's a faster way of getting directly to the data points that you're needing if you're up to speed on the standard reports. So we highly recommend you first start with the standard reports. You have to learn this. Think of the standard reports as your map for how Google thinks about how different dimensions and metrics work together. Only then should you then start to learn about custom reports. Custom reports are definitely more advanced. We're going to talk through this concept, how to think about it. But as a new DAP user, first start learning the standard reports. And when you feel more comfortable with the concepts, then branch out into creating custom reports. So we're going to make 3. I'll note that we do have a recorded 1-hour webinar on how to use custom reports. So definitely check that out offline if you have any questions on how to use custom reports. Okay, so there are 4 different types of custom reports. We've got an Explorer. This is simply using dimension drill downs. We'll do some illustrations of this in just a second. You basically look at one dimension at a time. This is the most common style. This is the default. This is going to look very close to the standard reports. A flat table custom report is simply a way to show more than one dimension at a time. So it lets you see all the data in a flat table. Almost looks like an Excel file. So this is the type of report you want to use if you want to export it into Excel or Google Data Studio and do some manual analysis in those types of software platforms. These flat table reports will have many rows. So if you pull a flat table report with 5,000 rows, it's going to have 5,000 rows whenever you export the data. Great for exporting. Map overlay. This report is really not going to be used all that often. This is simply a geographical overview of a map. This is only used when location is important. The map is interactive, so that's cool, but I would wager that you're probably going to get more value out of actual analysis from a flat table report. And then finally, we have a funnel report. This is a special report that is available in Google Analytics 360 in the DAP account that you can use to understand specific steps users take to complete an intended journey. So you can see where people enter and exit a specific part of their journey. So let's say you have a form that is 5 steps and you want to understand, what percentage of users enter that first page, fill it out, what percentage of those users drop out from that form funnel, and then what percentage of users continue on to the next step and the next step and so forth and so on. We'll illustrate an Explorer, a flat table, and a funnel report over the next few slides. So let's talk about first, using a landing page report as an example, let's talk about an Explorer report. So this should look pretty familiar from what we saw in Google Analytics. So we see here that we have a bunch of different metrics and dimensions. And we have the option of doing filters, and then we can create the report. So let me walk you through the next couple of slides here. Now, I am pulling, bear with me here. Now, I am using a different website than what we've typically looked at. I'm using collegescorecard.gov. So it's collegescorecard.ed.gov as my example in the Department of Education. And I'm going to show you how I put together this custom report. Now, you'll see here we've got Explorer, we got flat table, we got map overlay. This is an Explorer report. I've pulled in sessions, and remember Tim mentioned earlier that I'd be showing you a report showing sessions with events. You can combine a lot of cool dimensions and metrics here to understand, once somebody lands on a page, are they doing things like downloading PDFs or clicking on mail to links? We got bounce rate, we got total events, and then we have landing page and then default channel grouping. And I'm filtering for a landing page of collegescorecard.ed.gov. So there's a lot here. This is why you don't start out with custom reports first. You learn the basics by using the standard reports. Only when you feel comfortable with the concepts do you go back here. So let me click save. And once this loads, we're going to now see within the Department of Education, all landing pages containing collegescorecard.ed.gov with sessions with events, bounce rate, and total events. Now, when I drill into here, you'll remember the dimension I chose was default channel grouping. Now, that's the marketing channel with which traffic came and landed on this page. Now, you'll see a value of other. This is an interesting topic. This is more of an advanced topic, but just know that if you don't use the campaign URL tagging parameters, and there are other scenarios where this can happen, then traffic gets misclassified. So if you see this type of thing, definitely please follow up with us at our service desk at dap@support.digitalgov.gov. Now we see here that referral traffic is the largest traffic driver of sessions. And with those sessions, we see a lot of engagement with events, right? We see a relatively low bounce rate and total number of events of 1,316. So this is how you can start to use custom reports to pinpoint specific data points about your specific site. You literally have to build these. They are customized. So you need to know what you're doing. You need to know all the concepts, and then you need to actually bake in the logic that you want to see in the data behind the scenes so that you can get this data. Now, I do want to note that in a custom report, you can use all the functionality here of whatever segments you've pulled. So if I want to look at specifically mobile segments, a mobile segment cut of my data in this custom report, it has a nice functionality that lets me kind of toggle it really quickly. And then I get a view of all users, so all traffic versus my mobile cut of the data for each URL. So again, this is creating a report kind of in a vacuum. You're going to have to figure out on your end how you need to pull this data. That's the challenge here. Okay, so essentially, this report that I put together is going to let you understand, what channels, what marketing channels are sending traffic to your landing pages. Okay, let's talk about flat table reports. Now, I mentioned that this is really good for analysis. So this is for exporting data into an Excel file or a Google Sheets file, all right? Now, on the screen here, you'll see a flat table report. Now, let's look at how this differs. So let me toggle back over to Explore. Now, you'll see here I have all these metrics and I have these dimensions with a filter. Now, when you toggle over to flat table, it simply changes the kind of placement of them, but the logic still exists. So if I click Save, I now have the exact same data from my Explorer report, but in a different format. It's simply a table of data. So you'll recall here the referral source, right? The referral channel grouping, sending traffic to collegescorecard.ed.gov. This is the same data, just in a different format. Now, what you're going to do here is you're going to want to export this into an Excel file or a Google Sheets file, and then do manipulation of the data, do data analysis. It's going to be up to you on how you actually do that. Okay. All right. The last custom report we're going to talk about is the funnel report. Now, this is only useful if you have a specific journey that you're trying to track the number of users entering the funnel and dropping out at each stage. So that's really the benefit here. So let's look at this. Now, just to give you some background, the example that we're using here is college scorecards. So let me kind of walk you through the process here. So essentially, the Department of Education created a report where they are looking at how many people were doing a search for a school using this functionality here, not using the school's name. They're using other search parameters. Okay, so the idea here is they want to understand of the traffic that is doing searches using this tool, what amount of users are not actually typing in the name of the college, right? So this is a tool designed to help you find the right fit, the right college. So they only want to understand the percentage of users who are not typing in the college name using this functionality, but they're using only the custom search functionality like location, right? Okay, so the use case is these users who are not searching for the name of the college, they're going to type in something like the state. So let's say Connecticut. And then they're going to click Find Schools. And then they're going to go into the search results. And so let's say the user then clicks on Wesleyan University from the search results. The user reads this page. There's all this good information about the cost. They click the back button into the search results. And then the user is doing a comparison. So maybe they look at Trinity College, for example, to understand what the average annual cost is, graduation rate, salary, etc. Right? So this is the use case. All right. So basically, the Department of Education is interested in seeing if people are doing comparisons when they're not searching by the name of the college. So how are people using the tool? That's the idea here. So they're tracking in their reporting an intended user journey, tracking people who land on a page, click on a school, go back to the search page, and then click into another school. So this is a perfect example of a funnel report. So if you have a similar situation on your website, use this report. Now, this does get complicated. You can set up different stages in the journey. So this is more of a very advanced report, but let me walk you through the thought process here. So the logic that you would have to build here is you would literally have to define each page, each step of the journey. So we see here they land on the home page, right? You have to define what the home page is. The second step would be perform a search other than name, right? And then you have to build that logic into this step. The third stage is clicking on a school. The fourth stage is going back to search results. And then the fifth stage is clicking a second school, right? This all has to manually be baked in. And so let's look at the final product here. Okay, so we see 25,274 users landed on the homepage, okay? About 55% moved on to the next page of performing a search. 44% dropped out, they left. Okay, they did not perform a search. From the perform a search page, people, again, not searching by name, people looked for schools, about 55 or about 56% moved on to the next stage, which is clicking on a school in search results. 29% moved on from there. 42% dropped out, and so forth and so on, right? So all the way through this funnel, we see 5% made it all the way through this intended user journey that the Department of Education had figured out was important to them. They wanted to understand how are people comparing different schools. So that's how to use a funnel report. This is what is possible. Very flexible, very powerful, but also very complicated. So tread carefully if you get into this type of reporting, but just know that this powerful type of analysis that DAP provides you via the funnel report is possible. Let me go back to slides here. Now, one thing I do want to caveat here is sampling. The more specific you get with your reports, the higher the sampling error. So what this means is if you're pulling in segments or you're pulling in a bunch of different dimensions, you're gonna inevitably run up against certain thresholds in Google Analytics where they will sample you. Now, we can't tell you when that's gonna hit, but depending on how much data you're pulling, Google can and does sample you. So what that means is they will only give you a certain percentage of your data. And let's say they only give you 1%. Well, you can't infer any trends from that. You need to figure out how to get closer to 100% of all your data. And there is a little shield here. If you look at this custom report, you will see a little green shield. You need to hover over that to see how you're being sampled. If it's yellow, it'll tell you how much of your data is being sampled. If you have 1% or 2%, you need to definitely figure out a different way of pulling the data. Okay, So if you're working really high level in standard reports or in custom reports, you're going to be fine, but just, be very careful, tread lightly when you begin filtering for very, very granular things. It's very easy to misinterpret data if you pull too granular of data sets. Okay, so this is, again, another screenshot of what sampling looks like here. You need to always be checking the sampling shield. All right, so choosing the right KPIs. So what should be included in your reports? So there's some questions here to be asking, and that is, what is your agency's mission? What's your site goals? And what questions are you trying to answer? Who's receiving this report? How can this data influence our approach? These are all things that you need to be thinking about how you define a KPI. A KPI simply stands for Key Performance Indicator. So typically that's going to be a conversion rate. So for example, you could have a PDF download conversion rate of total number of PDF download events divided by total number of sessions entering a specific site. You need to know how to get at that data and understand that that's your appropriate KPI. Now, we can't tell you what your KPIs need to be to measure the success of your goals. That's something that has to happen in a strategy framework discussion on your team for how you're going to assess performance using your Google Analytics data. A couple other things that I just want to cover briefly: dashboards versus reports. Dashboards are used to monitor multiple metrics simultaneously. Let me kind of show you where those exist. They're under customization, dashboards. We don't use these all too often. And the problem or the challenge with dashboards is that they can be sampled, but they won't let you know that you're being sampled. So that can be a challenge with any type of dashboard. So for that reason, we typically don't advise using those, but they are available. Again, if you're going to hit sampling issues, you're better off pulling the reports from the standard reports. Reports are more efficient in that way, in that they focus on a smaller number of metrics. They allow for in-depth analysis. You can glean greater insights. They're a lot easier to use than dashboards or other custom reports. Couple quick final things, spreading the word: emailing and exporting reports. Now, you can email reports, but tread carefully here. You can select from within a report. I'll just show one to you here. Let me go to the channels report. So you can export and actually email. You see here, you can actually save the report. But in terms of emailing the reports to yourself, always be careful how and why you're going to email these things, because oftentimes we get folks coming to DAP asking us to turn these off, and we don't have access to these reports. So just know you need to have a good reason for emailing a report to you. You're probably going to get better results from just going into the tool and pulling the reports manually, exporting the data into a spreadsheet and doing your analysis there. I never email reports. I don't recommend it. It is a feature, but you're gonna need to do analysis on the data anyways, so why clog up your email?
Freddie, I think as you were trying to show there, it's under the share section. So if you want to create an emailed report, you can hit share in any report.
Right.
The one benefit is that you can set it up on a recurring basis, but that also tends to make people not look at it so much. So I'm in agreement with Freddie. It usually is better just to do an export of your own.
Yep. Okay, exporting reports. This is what you really should be doing, in my opinion. You can export to a Google Sheet or a CSV or an Excel file and then do analysis there. Now, one thing I should note, if you ever have a yellow shield here where you're being sampled, the beauty and the really cool functionality of DAP and Google Analytics 360 is that it allows you to export an unsampled report. So what this does is, if you're ever sampled, it will do queries on the back end and send you an unsampled report by email one time. So this is a great way of getting to the data and being able to do analysis without being sampled. Now, free Google Analytics accounts do not have this feature. So this feature set that DAP is providing you is really valuable in helping you get access to all of your data. Okay, last thing. There is a huge difference between reporting and analysis. So if you're sending emailed files to your boss of PDFs of the data, that is not analysis, right? That is just simply cranking out reports. You're never going to be able to influence anyone with that approach. The main reason why is reports don't have words. If you handed a copy of the report on the screen right now to someone, they're not going to know how to interpret it. Web analytics is really challenging, and understanding all the terminology and the ins and outs of the data is really complicated. So you need to do your own analysis of the data, right? And this is oftentimes going to require writing. I've done presentations before where there's been very limited numbers. There's only been outcomes or conclusions from the data, right? You're never going to influence your senior stakeholders or your leadership team by sending them a report like this. This is only one part of your analytics journey. The end goal here is to identify easily digestible and understandable insights so that your team and your senior leadership can make decisions off of your insights that you made from analyzing your data.